Hello, welcome back to the Red Path. I'm joined today by the Sandman, who should be on this side of the screen right now. How you doing, man?
I'm good, mate. I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. Really appreciate it. If you haven't seen, a few weeks ago I joined Ed on his channel, and we had a great little chat about Chaos Space Marine, kind of how they're doing in the meta. It was just an awesome time, and wanted to have him back, or have him on this channel, and we're going to kind of talk about codexes and the state of ninth, and how in a way the fluff is impacting the meta. Kind of, you'll kind of understand as we get into the topic here, but yeah, why don't you just give us a brief overview of your channel, your content, a bit about your 40k history, mate, just so everyone gets a bit more familiar with you.
Yeah, so I guess I have the same story of getting into 40k that everybody does. Got into it when I was a kid massively. I mainly played fantasy and then, dropped out because of girls, etc. Yeah. And then got back into it like when I had money to spend, and just fell deep down the rabbit hole, as we all do. Yeah. And my first love of Warhammer is actually Tau, believe it or not. Ooh, and okay. But my true love of Warhammer is the Dark Angels. But okay. Competitively, I've been playing the Gene Stealer Cults through most of ninth edition. Okay. And yeah, my channel is a bit more general. It's not specific on any of those. It's more just like general strategy, tactics, what armies are performing well in the game, that kind of thing. But yeah, mainly around that kind of thing.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's definitely a familiar story. Getting back into it when you've got money, for sure. Because then suddenly you don't have money again, right? It's like there's this brief window in your life, out of uni and, something like that. And then, oh, I've got money.
Sure.
It's time for 40k. Sure. But, okay, so let's dive right into it. I want to talk about starting off this kind of the state of the game. And just to clarify, we're going to talk about the codexes that basically have been released so far for 9th edition. We're not diving in depth or anything, but what I want to talk about is how the codexes, how the armies play in respect to how they should do in the fluff, right? So, when you're reading a Black Library novel, or even the fluff in a codex, or, the Lexiconum or something, you get this idea of how an army should function based on, how the particular authors are describing it. And I want to see, I've got my opinion. I'm not entirely sure what yours is, but we're going to find out how that incorporates and how they synergize. So I want to throw a number at you here. You may know this, but then we'll dive in. So we're, about 2 years into 9th edition now?
God, yeah, believe it or not.
Yeah. And I was just checking. I just wanted to make sure my numbers were right. In 8th edition, there were 20 full codexes. Like, not including the supplements, because then you get up closer to about 25, I think.
Yeah.
We are currently have 9 codexes out for 9th edition, with 11 to release. Now, there are 2 about to drop, and, we've got another 2 or 3 kind of in the next month or 2, hopefully. But we're only halfway through on our codexes.
Yeah.
I know we've had a different... The last couple of years have been very different and challenging, and I'm not complaining about it. But like 2 years into the edition, and we're pretty much halfway through the rules.
Yeah.
I mean, what do you think about that? Just is that surprising? Is it it is what it is?
So I guess I have a mixed opinion. Okay. Firstly, and I promise I'm not just going to pander to your audience, but one of the most notable things is that we don't have Chaos Space Marines, because of course they are the big baddie. Yeah. And to not have them is incredibly notable. Yeah. And because also it's such a large part of the community after Space Marines, right? Yeah. So for them not to have a faction, that is a big deal. That's kind of one separate thing. Of course, generally, I think everybody is very sympathetic to the fact that, of course, delays have happened just because of COVID, and that, I think everybody is sympathetic to that fact. Games Workshop have said it many times. I don't think anybody holds it against them. Yeah. However, at the same time, if you've got the delays, it is it is odd to make 3 books for Adeptus Mechanicus and not have those codexes. So it's kind of a push and pull. On the one hand, I'm very sympathetic, and I totally get it. On the other hand, why you wouldn't start those codexes, I don't know. Well, let's face it, we do know, but yeah, that's a bit disappointing from my point of view.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I think that's it. I think, to their credit, when they said they intended to release a codex every 2 weeks, I think that was genuine. I do believe that. However, at the same time, what I mean by that is, if that was the case, then we would have been fine, and no one would have minded these supplements, because they're like, in a couple of months you'll have your book, you'll be all right. But at the same time, when the delays started, they should have changed the order in which things were going to come out. In my opinion. Sorry, that was a very long explanation.
No. I mean, we're all entitled to. It's not saltiness. It's like, because even as a Chaos Space Marine player, I'm happy for Tau to be getting their book soon. As much as Tau is such like a boogeyman army, and they're even still a tough army for a World Eaters player right now, even using their rules. I know they're pretty bottom tier overall, but 8 versus 8, they still do well against us. Chaos Space Marines, Tau, Eldar, like Craftworld Eldar for sure, and Tyranids. I've got a feeling these really should have come before stuff like AdMech. But is what it is.
I mean, I think on the other hand, like the Chaos Space Marines in particular, does make me incredibly excited.
Yeah.
Because I am a believer in the idea that I think Games Workshop are going to ramp up to at least all of the Demon Primarchs at some point. And so, let's face it, I think all of us are kind of in the same mindset at this point in 9th edition, that the reason Chaos Space Marines, they're probably going to be last at this point, to be frank. And the reason for that is going to be because something big is coming. Fingers crossed. And I hold true to that idea. So that's the very big positive. But I'm so excited for that. Really.
Yeah, maybe 10th edition will just be Fulgrim versus Angron at every competition, because everyone's like, oh my god, that would be amazing.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. I said this to you when we did our video. It's like, we joke all the time about like, oh yeah, Night Lord's Warp Talons or something like that. But like, bearing in mind, let's face it, Codex creep is a little bit of a thing.
Yes.
And I don't think Codex creep is a deliberate thing. I think Codex creep happens because design philosophies change as they go through the codexes. So like, the best example being Chaos Space Marines. When they wrote that book, they went, okay, so Space Marines, Chaos Space Marines, these guys don't get traits on their vehicles. And then the design philosophy changed, and all of a sudden that did happen.
Yeah.
In 9th edition, as someone that reads all the codexes, there was definitely a point where they just upped the mortal wound output of books. Even like standard armies that shouldn't have massive mortal wound output, they all of a sudden went up to like 2d3 mortal wounds for stratagems instead of d3. So little things like that. There are changes. So Chaos Space Marines, as much as we joke about it, like in a year's time, we could be having a conversation on why, how sick we are of seeing 30 Warp Talons. It could well be a thing.
Yeah, you're not wrong. I do agree. Okay, so that kind of feeds into the next kind of topic here. The way, since we've had since 9th edition started, we've had, like I said, nine codexes have dropped, and your statement there about how the design philosophy has changed. You get different rules writers involved, or they see something happening in the meta, so they want to kind of guide the next book's release to maybe counter that a little bit. Overall, now, obviously this is with a caveat of, we have had things like AdMech and the very Drukhari being very oppressive, and Drukhari is still obviously very strong, but there was a really, really strong period of time for them. Orcs, when they first dropped. We've had these moments, and I'm not here to complain about broken codexes, the first month of release. Like, everyone's done that. We all know that. It's always going to be a thing. But there has seemed to be a kind of acceleration, a ramp up in effectiveness, which we'd call power creep, I guess. However, it does always also feel to me like there's an element of rock scissors paper in there, like with a couple of exceptions, like Necrons. I mean, I haven't seen their impact since their core change, but aside from Necrons, it does feel like when a new book drops, one or two of the older books can still do work against them in some builds. So it's like maybe there's a business intent to make a book very strong, but a balancing intent to make sure somewhere there's a counter that can be played with one of the newer armies that maybe's fallen out of favour a bit. Have you noticed anything like that, or does it just genuinely feel like it's a every time they turn the dial up one more notch kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a believer in it. Yeah, I guess I don't know how I explained it, but like I don't believe that each book comes out as a little bit more powerful. Right. So, for example, at the time of recording, sorry to spoil the illusion, Custodians and GSC are not out. Right. Now, I'm a bit of a believer, and I will probably look very wrong when this airs, but I don't think we will see GSC and Custodians come out and be like, oh, the power output from those books is incredible. Okay. Now, the reason I say that is because GSC and Custodians are two very nice armies in a way, because they have two very, very big flaws. Custodians, very, very slow. GSC, very, very easy to kill. So either way around, you'll probably be, even if your army's terrible, it's very unlikely you'll feel like you can never beat them, right, unless things are pointed incredibly efficiently. Yeah. So, like, yeah, I don't believe that will happen. I think that there's been so few codexes, it's actually quite hard to say if that's the case, that things are just getting better and better. Yeah, I think Admech, it's basically Admech and Drukhari that were the big things. Sisters were very, very good, but I think Sisters actually got nerfed from their 8th Ed book in a lot of ways.
Yes.
Yeah. And so, yeah, that's kind of my opinion. So I do think that they're doing a good job. And to be honest, and that's the thing. I feel like I've had my moan at that point, which is about the books. Overall, I'm actually very, very happy with the way the direction of things are going, and the reason for that is because I think they have, and we'll talk more about this afterwards. I think I'm very happy with most of the rules they have released. I think I read all these codexes, and I think, you know what, pretty much all of these rules are good. They're solid rules, and I don't look at them and think I don't look at anything in that Drukhari book right now and think there's nothing in here. There's nothing in here that I can't deal with. And I was playing GSC, statistically not a very strong army, but at the same time, it was the case that they just got the points a bit wrong.
Yeah.
And my previous complaint was absolutely the problem when that happens is that if they don't address those points for a year, and then when they address them, they do something like they did with the balanced age slate. That in the past, we would have been looking at, I'm not exaggerating, like 2 years of Drukhari dominance, and that would have been very bad for the game and the meta. However, now with the plan to update the points every few months, I think that's brilliant. I think the game is going to a really good place. And I know it can be hard to see that because they balanced a few of the armies a little bit. With Admech, it might have gone a little bit too far. With Drukhari, they didn't go far enough. But I think that with these balances, in the competitive scene at least, I think things are going to a good place. That's my point of view, personally.
No, I respect it. And I mean, I pretty much agree across the board there, I think. And yeah, there's a couple of points that I think we're going to touch on here in a little bit. So let me ask you, let's shift direction here more to kind of the fluff and stuff like that. First off, what is your personal opinion on the importance of like the narrative, the aesthetic, the fluff for your tabletop army, for when you are playing a game? And I'm talking about even if you're at a competition, you're at a tournament and you're on a top table. I'm not going to steal it here, but I just want to quickly give an example. Yeah. Like for me, I still have a story going in my head. Like sometimes I'll still make a charge that I shouldn't because it's what those berserkers would do, right? So like, what about yourself?
I tell you what, that example you just given is probably one of my favorite things about playing GSC, because I do love tactics,
Yeah.
and I do love strategy, and of course world eaters.
Yes.
You know, howling banshees. If you've got all these units in your army, you might go like, well, the narrative thing for me to do at this point would be to sacrifice the objective and get into combat.
Yeah.
When you play GSC, a lot of the time, the narrative thing to do is be a coward and run away for the sake of the hive mind.
Yeah.
And that's the overall plan. So I quite like that. So often I do make the narrative decision in that respect. But yeah, I think we're all the same. I'll be honest, I love more restrictions on my army. So I'll give you a good example. With Genestealer cults, there's a rule in the Genestealer cults book. I assume it will be the same in 9th edition, which says that you can only have one of each character in your army. That, of course, is a big hindrance. You know, if you could take 3 Kelemorphs, you could take 3 snipers, you know, whatever it's going to be, that would be big. But I love that we can't do that, because I'm someone that when I go to a tournament, of course, like most people, I don't want to take a list that is deliberately worse than what my friends are going to take or other competitors. Yeah. But at the same time, if we're all forced to be more narrative, I think that's great. Like personally, so I have a mixed relationship with souping. I love the idea of souping for specific things. Of course, great example being, you know, Chaos Space Marines and Demons. And I think there should be, you know, Imperial Guard and Knights, let's say, whatever you want to do. And I think there should be loads of provisions in the game to allow for those things. But I don't like unfluffy souping at all. I don't like, you know, like a classic one with me, if it's like I've got one of this cult and a battalion of this cult and a patrol of this cult. I've never liked doing that. It's always felt wrong. And when I play the army, it does feel wrong, and I have to do it because to do it provides such an advantage, and I am a competitive person by nature. But at the same time, I wish I couldn't. I wish Games Workshop came with a rule that made even if compared to other armies I was worse. I just don't want to deliberately take I don't want to deliberately kneecap myself. Absolutely. I want Games Workshop to force me to be narrative. So and I do think there's been a lot of stuff like that. Of course, you know, we saw things like with Necrons. It's like, you know, if you've got the Silent King, he has to be your warlord or whatever. Your overlord has got to be a warlord. You can't just go for a Technothrall or whatever. I love those kind of things. I think that they are great, and I hope more of them come. I really do. So yeah, kind of a bunch of things there.
I 100% agree with your sort of like love of restrictions, because you know, like one of the it's a bit of a meme, but you know, Khorne obviously hits his own units when he misses in combat, right? And I absolutely love it. Like I've given away bring it down points by killing my own Contemptor Dreads and stuff, and you know, even in my head, I knew that I should not position him in such a way, but I'm like, no, this is the straightest line to the enemy. It's Khorne. That's what he's doing. But I do really like those kind of negative rules, I guess you want to call them, like debuffs or whatever. Like whether it's a restriction on particular characters in GSC case, or Khorne doing exactly what Khorne would do and killing anything that's close enough to be killed. You know, I do like those things, and I would like to see more of them across the board, and I hope it does remain consistent with the kind of restrictions on who can be your warlord, or, you know, maybe more of a penalty to souping and stuff. But I also agree that there are certainly some cases where it should be beneficial, or at least not restrictive, like Demons and Chaos Space Marines. Certainly something like Word Bearers and Demons, I think, that should be 100%. Like, you almost have to do it in a way, because that's how they would play in the lore. So, you kind of touched on it a bit, but how do you think so far in 9th, Games Workshop have been actually incorporating these kind of fluffy aspects into the rules themselves? Obviously, I know you mentioned you've been playing a lot of GSC, but I know you play other armies as well. So whatever one Codexes you're more familiar with in 9th, probably best. You can talk about 8th edition stuff as well. But getting that fluffiness, that when you're reading a novel and these are my guys, this is my army or whatever, and then when you're able to mechanically implement that on the table, you think they're doing a good job so far?
Yeah, I mean, I guess so. It's one of those things where I have a lot of sympathy for them, because I think a great example where it's never going to be like the Fluff, but that is fine, are Grey Knights and Custodes. Because of course, you know, if you looked at that Shadow Throne box, of course, narratively, that is not a battle.
Right.
The idea that, what is it, like 5 custodies and 5 sisters of silence against that in the books, that is like 1,000 gene stealer cultists.
Yeah.
They would walk through. Like there's no comparison there, of course. So there are very good things that they sacrifice for the fluff, because of course they can't make it the case that if you are custodies you always win, as they write in the Annals of Terror, or whatever it is, and that kind of stuff. And similarly with Grey Knights, of course, you know, the psychic output of that army should melt as so many armies. Of course, narratively they have to make sacrifices, and that's good. So there are things like that. I would say first that, like, they sacrifice those things for the purpose of the, and you know, you have to add those cinematic moments in your mind, which is what we all do, right? And you know, like Khorne, for example, is much more of a champion compared to a standard Chaos Lord than what you get on the tabletop. However, at the same time, there are also fun things that they do that are narrative, and they have, I think, done a better job, because I mean, basically, there's more rules now in 9th edition, which has allowed them to do more stuff. So all the factions having 2 faction rules now. So you know, you got doctrines, dynastic protocols, you know, all these kind of things. That has helped a lot in making things feel a bit more fluffy. And also all of the sub factions getting more stuff. So you know, most of the sub factions now don't just have a chapter trait and a relic. Chapter trait and a stratagem, as they got an 8. Now they've got like, you know, more stuff. You know, relics, warlord traits, psychic powers, all this kind of thing. I think that's really cool, and I think that they encourage you to play narratively most of the time. Sometimes things don't land exactly as they should do, but you know, like, let's say, you know,
your screen's frozen.
Oh,
your video's frozen. Oh no, now you're back. Okay. As soon as I stop.
It's all right. Again. So sometimes things don't land exactly as you'd expect. So you know, everyone knows something like obliterators in you know, Emperor's Children. It might not be the meta choice now, but if it was in the past, and that kind of wasn't what they were aiming for. But still, generally speaking, it goes down roughly where you'd like it to go. So I think they're doing a pretty good job. I don't know any key failings I can think of there, because it's never going to be perfect. So like I said, I think they've done a pretty good job generally. I don't know how you felt about it.
Yeah, I'm very happy with 9th edition and how they've sort of melded the two, like you said, the cinematic moments in your head, the way you feel the battle should be going, and how those rules play out. I mean, we're going to go into our kind of favourite codexes here in a minute, so I don't want to sort of spoil myself here. But I've got some favourites that I think, for me, just, they do it perfectly. And I think key is what you mentioned about the addition of rules, or the more rules we've got. You know, it's problematic in the way that, you know, older books are just left behind. Like we are. Like, I played a Dark Angels player on TTS the other day, and turned out we're both going to LVO. So I know he's, you know, a good player because he's taken Dark Angels to LVO. So he's got some time and investment in there. And I had a good game. Like, I lost, but I had a good game again. But I had to play my guts out to scratch the surface. And in a way, he was able to just, okay, you killed 2 Terminators. Here, I'm bringing 1 back. Like, it was very fluffy, but it was also, compared to my army's output, very powerful. So there's a disparity there. But on topic, that Deathwing list was incredibly fluffy. When I've, you know, read about and, you know, thought about the Deathwing actually working in the lore, that is how it's a brick of Terminators, essentially, that just do not stop. Nothing stops them, like, you know, until, like, whatever plot has to actually change for it to happen. But narratively, Deathwing should just not die. And in the tabletop, generally, they just do not die. So I really like that, how the mechanics have been incorporated. So on that point, what are some of your favourite 9th edition codexes in regard to that, in regard to incorporating the fluff into the mechanical abilities of the armies.
Yeah, I mean, apologies, but Dark Angels were going to be my first choice.
Sorry, man.
No, it's all right. It's all right. But I was going to go for one specific reason, really, which is that I have adored the proactiveness of Games Workshop here to make it so that you can play Ravenwing and Deathwing specific armies. And, you know, of course, we've got the Ravenwing Outrider, the Deathwing Vanguard, and I've loved that so much. I think that is so great, and I think that it wasn't too much. I think Deathwing is perhaps not the most fun army to play into.
Yeah,
but sure. I think that it's not. But I think, and it definitely has some very good matchups. But I think in terms of like the meta, when you look back at I just did a video on the top armies of 2021, and Dark Angels really didn't dominate at any point in the year. They were always okay, but they didn't smash it consistently. And so I think they've done a pretty good job. But I think, you know, what I really take away is that I really want that to be expanded. And I don't know so much about a lot of the loyalist factions. Of course, we've got White Scars and Bikes, but, you know, we've got Eldar. I would like to think, you know, Samhain, Eandon and Wraith, just all the Wraith machines. Like, I would love it if they all got like their own Vanguards, their own Outriders, you know, Chaos Space Marines. You know, pretty much every single Legion, Traitor Legion has a narrative option there. So I hope that that's a big thing. I really want that to be expanded. So I've loved that one. So that is my number one for that reason. Yeah, I thought that was very fluffy, and like the reason I started playing Dark Angels was because I was like, oh my god, an army of bikes was so great. But in 8th edition that didn't quite work because you know, you were playing a bit of a disadvantage. But then in 9th edition it's a properly viable army. You know, you don't see many Raven players winning tournaments, but it's certainly not like a bad army. So I've loved that dearly. I think that's so cool.
I agree. I do like the ability to change a detachment to be more beneficial to a particular army style. For instance, a lot of elite Terminators or fast attack bikes. I think those are great choices, and I do hope to see more of that sort of thing as well. My favourite incorporation codex so far is Death Guard. In my opinion, and this is a hot take, this is some controversy here, I think Death Guard is the best codex released in 9th edition.
Interesting.
It's strong competitively. No, it's not, you know, it hasn't done like what Admech and Drukhari have done, absolutely. But those were briefly broken. Death Guard has, you know, had moments of being a bit absurd, more to do with the lack of opponents fighting at the same level. But once other books dropped, it stabilised. Death Guard today is still very strong. It still has options. I don't think there's an issue with the competitive balance of Death Guard. I think, short of really getting unlucky and building a very skewed list that doesn't go into Death Guard, anyone can have a good game against them if you know how to outplay them based on their speed and stuff like that. You can still score points against Death Guard. But for me, it's the fact, you know, with Chaos, you've got some real easy moves. You know, you got your sacred numbers and your colour schemes, and, you know, like for Death Guard, it's going to be anything to do with putrescence and noxiousness and things like that. So you can layer those and sprinkle those bits of fluff in. But I think the actual rules and the way every good Death Guard army I've seen, played against, read about, the way they play is how the Death Guard are described to me. Like, whether you're talking about the sort of Horus Heresy, like pre-fall, or like one of the Siege books I just read, Warhawk, where they're really sort of diving into being actually corrupted now. They are corrupted, but one of the characters is on that precipice of truly falling. So it's like that catalyst moment for them. And then some of like the Dark Imperium books and stuff like that, where they're just straight up heretics. They're always a slow, relentless, or I can never say this word, inexorable, whatever that is. They do not stop. They're slow, they're ponderous, but they get where they're going, and they take all the firepower you want. And coupling that with like some of their like disgusting psychic things they can do and stratagems, and they just, every time I see them on the table, they do exactly what I want them to do. And often that hurts my heart because, you know, I throw a squad of berserkers and, oh, I took one wound off of a Terminator because, you know, they just put all these layers of protection and things like that. But that's also perfect. So like after I get over my, you know, frustration, I'm like, yeah, that guy probably would have taken all those attacks and just laughed about it as he was doing it. So I do think for me, Death Guard is probably the gold standard in my opinion. But I'm gonna say something here, and I don't know. Okay. You may just disconnect from the chat. I don't know. I think the Admech book, short of the flyer spam and some of the abuses that were able to be pulled out, like the horse dogs on TTS and stuff, I think Admech is also very, very good.
But interesting. Okay, cool.
And the reason for that is because it's so absurdly complicated. I remember when it dropped, I don't know if it was Goonhammer or someone made like a flow chart of all the different like ways you had to you know, you've got your Skitarii and then, but you know, you've got your, and it was, I was like, okay, you would literally have to be a computer. You would have to be like an abominable AI or something to understand this. And then in less competitive games, you know, seeing them on like something like Tabletop Tactics, where they're playing a good match play game, and it's like you just imagine the player is like a you know, a Skitarii Marshal or whatever, and they're just like sending out their binaric chants and like this unit moves, and it's got for me it's got what Admech should be doing. But it was just so efficient, and they missed a couple of tricks by not restricting how many things you can put on that 20 blob of, you know, Rangers or whatever. Yeah. Any thoughts on that? Because I see you're still on the chat. So.
Yeah, no. So I think you and I are very much on the similar wavelength. So yeah, Death Guard are absolutely up there for me as one of the best codexes. Absolutely. I think that we saw a increase in lethality that wasn't obvious at the point of Death Guard dropping, and so when that Mortarian data sheet came out, people did panic for a fair bit, and I'll be honest, he is still very, very good. But at the same time, that book is, I think, has aged very, very well. I think especially when you include Terminus Est, which provides a very different kind of zombie horde playstyle. Love that. I think it's actually a really great book, and that is something that is interesting and is my caveat for Necrons, because I have to believe there is more coming for Necrons. I have to believe that, because Games Workshop talked about the Destroyer cult so much, so often, for there not to be Destroyer cult rules. I'm like, okay, there's something. This has to be. So I think Necron players hold true. Well, you can't do anything else, can you? You're the program. Yeah. Anyway, but Admech, absolutely. So I think there are some real pluses to that book, and I think that in order to properly explain this, I think I do just have to say, when I say the quality of a book, I'm kind of going to ignore the points, not completely, but largely, because the points, touch wood, are now going to be changed every few months to benefit things. So I know your priests are not great at the moment. However, with that fight last stratagem, let's face it, your priest can become very good very quickly.
Against some armies it can,
So it can be really, really powerful. And I think there are some things about that Admech, and my favorite part of the Admech Codex that got massively overshadowed by the prominence of that faction in the meta was the Admech Wi-Fi, the data tethers. It was such a fantastic rule. Games Workshop looked at that book and they dismantled the castle, and it was fantastically done, unwritten. Now, absolutely, the problem was, at the same time, they also pointed things far too cheaply so that you could grant massive amounts of buffs, and
Yeah.
I think there was also a feel bad there because command phases lasted way too long.
Yeah.
Bad mech players, and so that can be quite unfun
Yeah.
when playing against them. But I thought the book was actually properly brilliant.
Okay.
And I think it's tough to see that when they're at the top of the meta.
Yeah.
But like, I had this conversation multiple times with a friend of mine who was like, it is, and he said many times, it is ridiculous that AdMech can hit on 2s for a turn. And I was like, it's honestly not. AdMech once per game get a 16% increase in their output for their shooting and a 16% decrease in their output for combat, and they do both of those things. That's actually not anywhere near the best faction ability in the game.
Right,
it's once per game. So I was like, this is actually, you know, everything in that AdMech book worked really well. It had a delicious level of complexity. There's a bit of an argument to say that some people say that armies shouldn't be more complicated than others because all armies should be like a Space Marine level, so that they should be enticing for new players.
Yeah.
However, I'm not a believer of that. I do like the gradient.
Yeah,
I do like the fact that there are some armies that are a bit more complicated to play. Again, if you disagree with that, perfectly fine. Which is that opinion, and I totally get it. But yeah, I actually loved that book. I thought it was really good. And likewise, and I apologize if people do stop watching this point, but I think another example of where you kind of have to ignore the points a bit, but is the Drukhari book. The Drukhari book, in terms of a book, it is a great book. So I think the Beasts haven't landed, of course. I don't think the Beasts have ever been good, as I've been playing 140k, outside of real meme builds. But outside of that, as we can see from the data state, all of those units have potential, and if they are pointed correctly, I think that is a tremendously fun army to play. I think it's got very obvious win condition. I think it's got a very, very obvious weakness as well. So I think that it's a fantastic army. I loved that they had advantages to transports. They were better in transports than other factions in the game, which makes sense because they don't have things like psychic. Like all of the strats were brilliant. Like you know. When it first dropped, you know, you kind of thought, oh, maybe the Hellion strat to kill characters or something might be powerful, but actually, you know what, taking 20 Hellions is maybe not the best idea. Yeah. So I think all these things balance out. So I actually really like the AdMech and Drukhari books. I genuinely love them. It's just the points thing. However, and again, I'm touching wood still, because Games Workshop stay true to what they've said. That's like a month away, guys. The next, you know, I mean, it might be chapter approved at this point. Let's be honest, but the next balancing of points should bring them down, and then I think everyone will be like, actually, these armies are really fun.
Yes.
And they're really great. And like, you're going to be playing against AdMech. If someone wants to take a shooting AdMech army, they still want to castle up. That's great. That's what you want to play against. You know, and also like I actually really like the Skitarii Horde as well, because I love the aesthetics of the general what's his name? The Skitarii General, the newer model, and all of the Skitarii Vanguard and Rangers. It looks so Napoleonic. It's absolutely brilliant. So I thought it was a really cool way to go. It was just they got the points wrong, but now that they're right, actually AdMech right now are a really fun army to play into. I think they're really fun, and so Drukhari will go the same way. I'm sure of it.
Well, Dara, one of his housemates, is a very strong Drukhari player, and they would play together, I think, like at least once a week for like a long time. I believe he's now playing Tyranids or something, but for 8th and 9th, Dara would play against Drukhari every week, and I don't want to disparage him, but I don't think he actually beat him. In all those games, I think I seem to remember he came close a couple of times, but he couldn't crack the nut, right? And even then, and we've talked about it on videos before, he and I have a very, very similar opinion to yours. Drukhari is a great book. I think the comment he made was something like, you go to a tournament, like an actual tournament, a GT or something, and you walk past a table, and there's a pirate horde. There's space elf pirates, a raiding force that looks like what it should look like. It's 4 or 5 space boats with murder, pistol knife murder elves jumping out very fast to quickly cut the head off of what they need, and then they're going to run away again. And yes, the points is what I mean, there was a few broken combos in there as well. But the points is the foundation upon how broken something can be. And even after playing them so many times, and I've played them a few times now, they still look like what I want a Drukhari list to look like, more or less. Now, maybe the kind of thick city thing is going away, is changing it up a little bit now, which it's not going to be around forever. It's a flash in the pan, I think. And like you say, we're going to get our chapter approved or balanced in soon, and things are going to change once again.
Yeah, I would say, I think there's a conversation to be had about internal balance for sub factions potentially. So I think the best example is actually the Dark Angels, because like I said, I don't think Deathwing are a very good army. You can absolutely win a tournament with Deathwing, but they are absolutely not a death sentence of a matchup. Right. So I think that that's great. The problem, in my opinion, the reason I'm not a massive fan of the permanent transhuman physiology personally is because I also love Ultramarines, and I also think that I want to lead the first company of the Ultramarines, and that should be a viable army. Right. The problem is they use the same points, and putting transhuman and putting fallback and shoot and +1 leadership, those things cannot be balanced efficiently. So, and there's a bit of that in Drukhari. So of course the -1 damage is obviously sensational. Yes. But some of those things I would like to see. I would say I'd like to see FAQ. That it's tough to FAQ things that aren't points often, because it can throw off new players. But going into 10th edition, which I'm sure we'll talk about later, is that would be one thing I would want them to look at. But outside of that, love them. Really love them.
Okay, well, let's segue there. Let's use that as a segue. And the books that we haven't got yet. Let me just pull up my list here. So the books that are not available to purchase right now: Guard, Nids, Eldar Demons, Chaos and Imperial Knights, Tau, Chaos Space Marines, obviously, Harlequins, Custodies, and Genestealer Cults. I think that covers everything that hasn't been released yet. Apologies if I'm missing something. Of those, what are you kind of looking forward to the most? And obviously, we know, you've been playing a lot of GSC and they're about to drop. But just from a more kind of like God's eye view, which ones are you more objectively excited about how they're going to incorporate the narrative element onto the tabletop for potentially being quite competitive, in the same vein as Deathwing or Death Guard, for instance, very strong and very appropriate?
Yeah, so I think Tau are a big one, and I might be biased here, but I think when I've played 40k for quite a long time, and there was things like Fish of Fury and that kind of stuff, but outside of that, Tau have never felt like they do in the lore. I actually really like the Tau books, right? And in the Tau books, there's not I don't want to say there are things like castles, and they do defend things. However, it is not the defining trait of them. Right. So, for example, things like Pathfinders are ridiculously important. Crisis suits do not just shy away; they get incredibly close up. And when we look at the AdMech book, and I talk about there how they dismantled castling, generally speaking, I'm fascinated to see how they do that for Tau, because of course the eighth ed rules were built upon castling. It was you must be near to other units in order to get these benefits. The more you're nearby, the better you are. And I want the opposite. Right. I want completely the opposite in 9th edition. I want them to almost say, if your Pathfinders, if they're on the other side of the board, they get bonuses. If if you've got piranhas, going over the battlefield, they get much better, and all that kind of stuff. The faster you move, the better you go. I want Tau to be quick but easy to kill, devastating but not horrific. They're going to be Tau are a really tough one to balance. If I don't want to talk about the Hammerhead, because that's not what I'm talking about here. But I mean, just generally speaking, Tau are a really hard one to balance, because they essentially do two things. They do movement and they do shooting. So of course Games Workshop writes that book and they make that shooting really good to account for the fact there's no combat and there's no psychic. Now, I will say we have had a preview already saying that crisis suits can shoot into combat.
Yeah.
However, that's not everything, of course, because that's still not like charging and punching. So it's really interesting. I'm fascinated to see what they do with that book. Like proper Montcar Kion would be really good. Maybe we'll get O'Case and you'll get some sort of lone warrior type situation, but I don't know. I'm fascinated by that book. I really want to see how it comes out. Custodies are quite a big one for me, because I love the Custodies very much, and narratively, as I say, they are ridiculous, of course. And when we talk about 2,000 points, let's be real, for a lot of these armies, a single custodian would match 2,000 points of a lot of armies. So, well, depending on who writes them.
Right.
But so I want to see them, but I also want to see the Sisters of Silence, is the thing. And so that becomes immediately quite interesting, because Custodies, in theory, when you take out Soup, which all of the armies have been incentivizing monofaction, when you take out Soup, an army of Custodies, it's quite nice to write, I think, as a rules writing team, because they have a very obvious weakness, which is that they're slow and they don't have much ball control, which means you can afford to give them extra lethality, extra durability, all of these kind of things. However, Sisters of Silence provide cheap, easy units to allow them to do screening. There's some great synergy in the protection from mortal wounds. I really want to see that. But I'm really hopeful, because I just finished the Regent's Shadow series, and the two books. I assume there's a third one coming, but and I really like the Sisters of Silence. I thought they were really cool, but I hope they're not just these throwaway units in the Custodies book that protect them from mortals. I hope that it's like, because that seems like such an obvious fix for me, is it's like, don't make them like that. Give them all like 3 wounds and they're -1 to hit, -1 to wound because they're nulls. Give them a bunch of crazy rules. That's what I would do. So I'm really hopeful for that. Apologies if by the time this comes out you already know. I guess we've had Shadow Throne, so we'll see a lot of stuff, but we haven't seen the faction abilities, etc. So we'll see how things go.
I agree. I've only got 3 squads of Sisters of Silence, but I've had them longer than my World Eaters. I bought them because I loved the models and loved them in the lore, and then realised I couldn't really play them, so then I built like an Inquisition force, and if I play fluffy games with them occasionally, I have them just because. And I am honestly tempted to start buying some Custodies so I can run them, but I'm also very committed to running World Eaters, so we'll see. Maybe a little bit of a side project, or another side project, I guess. I like that. I'm quite excited for Harlequins. Now, whether I'm not 100% sure how they're going to go. I'm wondering if they'll just be a supplement or something different. I don't think. I remember someone mentioning they might be a part of the Craft World book. I think they'll retain some uniqueness, but it could somehow be a supplement or in a campaign book or something, maybe. But I do really like them.
Rumors.
I do really like them, and I think although they're a very model restricted army, they just don't have much. I think there's ways that they could be done, and I just love their kind of like their Segara, the laughing god, basically. And the models are so great, and I just love how in 8th the way they would just like move, just get across the board, like, and you just imagine them doing acrobatics across the board, like they don't care about terrain or enemy models and stuff like that, just vaulting over. The only thing though, there is I can't remember what book it's in, and I'll try to avoid spoilers here, but there's some Harlequins, I believe, that are fighting some Custodies under the...
Is that the War of the Beast?
Yes, because they want to get in to warn, make a warning, and as much as I do love them, like the way they write the Custodies there, it was like that's a miss. That's not. Maybe
not a Custodies player.
They should have been made Space Marine Scouts, or like Scions or something. Could have been treated like that. Harlequins are very good, no doubt. They're not that good. Like they're not that good. But I do.
The Emperor was aware of Harlequins when he made.
Yes. Yeah.
So yeah, I get you.
Yeah. But they're another faction I just have a real soft spot for. I thought about making an army from once, and whilst they are limited in their models, I do think they can incorporate the fluff into their rules to just make them a fun army to play with and against, like genuinely fun. Like you actually have, like you laugh at some of the stratagems you play because they do absurd things or something. You know, like I think there's a way if they got a smart enough rules writer in there, they could actually do that, and I think that would be pretty cool.
Yeah, I think there's some very, down that route. There's some kind of classic things they could just do there, right? Like their faction abilities could be like acts of the play, each battle round, stuff like that. I think absolutely Harlequins are an army where they should add quite a bit of complexity, because in a similar way to GSC, actually, a couple of similarities, that they have a small model range, which means that you can afford to have the book be quite complicated, because any intimidation you get from the rules is countered by the fact that there's actually not that many units to choose from, and also the thing about Harlequins is that they're not a popular first choice for an army, because of course they're generally speaking people do very elaborate paint schemes. So yeah, and I think that works very well for them. I think they should be very, very tricksy. I think that there's definitely one unit that doesn't see any play, which is of course the Void Weaver. So that's a unit that is immediately Harlequins players might not get a new unit, but they're getting a new unit if that unit becomes playable. Because I don't think I've ever seen I don't think I've ever seen anybody take one. But yeah, I think absolutely it should be like. No, it's the heavy support. It's like the Star Weaver, but it's got a big gun on it. But the problem is it's better gun is the Haywire, and of course the Haywire is best than Sky Weavers. So that's why no one takes them.
Okay.
And of course it's kind of a good thing. It would be a good thing for Harlequins because they need stuff to hold their backfield objectives that aren't troops, things you want in combat, whatever. So I would like to see a lot of complexity added to that book. I think that would be really cool. Yeah, love the Harlequins and Eldar generally. I think they were going. Craftworlds were going to be my third, because I think that I think I'm excited to see. I like because when Eldar have been really good, again. I'm not somebody that says everything that is good is not fun to play against. I'd like to think I've demonstrated that by saying I like Admech, I like Drukhari. But when Eldar have been good, they've been quite unfun. And it's not necessarily not fluffy, because Elatok planes would be tough to hit. And 3-up Invan massive blobs from psychic powers does kind of make sense narratively. However, from my point of view, they weren't the most fun things to play into. So I want a proper fun Eldar army to play into, something that's very fast, very tricksy, but not, something you can try and play around if you're clever, and maybe the monkey have a few tricks of their own. So I'm very excited for that book. I think that a lot of things have been toned down. GW have been very good at identifying things that should be removed from the game. So when units can't be interacted with, being a brilliant one. So things like Dark Reapers there are going to have to be a little bit cleverer. Things like putting 3-up Invans on massively important blobs. Those kind of things I assume will be going. So I'm very excited to see what they do with Eldar. And like I say, I think there's a whole bunch of narrative they can do with them. And I can't wait to see it. We saw. We get some previews soon, so I'm really excited for that one.
I think I honestly, it's kind of a cop out. I'm excited for every book that's going to come out, for different aspects. Some armies I've got more of an attachment to than others. I do think, given the track record so far of quality of incorporating the fluff into the rules, competitive spikes aside, and as we've just talked about for the last hour or so, it's been pretty darn good, certainly in our opinions. I think I'd be interested to hear if anyone really strongly disagrees with us, outside of a few niche moments that have happened here and there. I'm always up to be challenged. Maybe we're completely wrong. Just let us know. 100%. But it could happen. But I am based on the track record, I think all the books we're going to get, I think the game is going to get better because of it, in my opinion. But do you foresee any of either the books or anything else that may challenge, that may throw a wrench in the works here? Or do you think it's just we're gonna get more of the same and the quality of the game will just slowly improve?
Yeah, I mean, so I think the two that I would immediately say you should be a little bit eyebrow raised for, always, every edition, are going to be things like Tau and Knights, and I think they are very easy to make broken, and it's not a mistake. It's just Knights are such a skewed army, Warhammer 40k. It takes very much for them to have some incredibly advantageous matchups. So like when it comes to balancing Knights, it's incredibly hard. If you look at it this way, Games Workshop originally goes in and says, right, so let's take a standard Space Marine army. It's got 600 points of anti-tank. So we want to be able to make a Knights list, and bearing in mind the Knights will probably target those units straight away. So those Knights, that we want to balance them, so this is a fun game. Cool. Okay. And then when they write that book, a bunch of armies go, oh yeah, I've actually got 1,500 points of anti-tank, and the Knights players go, oh, that's, and then they have to rebalance them, and all of a sudden they make Knights really tough, and then the standard armies can't go get Knights. You see where I'm going with? It's a bit of a back and forth. Ultimately, it becomes very hard to balance Knights, and that's the argument. I don't believe this, but there is an argument to say they shouldn't be in the game because of how much they skew things. Likewise with Tau, because they do one thing and one thing only, Games Workshop goes, all right, so you don't hit as well as Eldar, you don't have combat like Eldar, you don't have psychic like Eldar, you've got shooting and you hit on 4s. Okay, so we have to make your shooting hitting on 4s as good as all of these things together. Oh, okay. So like it becomes very hard to balance, and it's very easy for Games Workshop to point things a little bit too cheaply, add a mortal wound on 6s where they shouldn't, something like that, and things become silly. So that does worry me, genuinely. But like I say, the wondrous thing about Warhammer 40k right now is that if that does happen, it is for a few months, and then these things get balanced, and that's absolutely brilliant. And I think that next year, until we get the full 9th ed books, things are going to be very tough for the 8th ed codexes, because as we saw from the tournaments in the US that used the 2022 chapter approved, the standard secondary objectives are much harder to get for most armies. Some armies will be fine. Like GSC, I think, are going to play quite well into the new objectives. But if you don't have your own secondary objectives, that's big. I think it's going to be a really big thing, quite a big points disadvantage in most games. So that is another thing that I'm a bit worried for, and I do think there's a good chance we could see things like Chaos Space Marines really drop off a cliff with that new book, because if they just can't, if they can't get their rods easily, if they can't do these things, it's like, where do they get their points? And so that worries me a little bit. But like I say, these things, everything, once the ninth ed codexes come, so happy, generally speaking. Just get 9th ed books come, the FAQ, the points balance, perfect, absolutely perfect. I'm so happy with everything, generally speaking.
That's basically my answer for this question. Is the only problem I have, more so than any points problems with new books, is the faction secondaries, because every time a faction gets their own secondaries, they play the game at another level compared to those of us running 8th. Exactly like you said, and although I hadn't really considered it, I think maybe in my lizard brain somewhere I had. Yes, I'm thinking just off the top of my head, I think with assuming the rest of the secondaries get slight changes or stay the same to be a little bit more advanced in the way that rod's changing and stuff like that, or R&D, I guess. I want to say about half the missions, 4 or 5 of the missions become very, very difficult for my army specifically, unless my opponent is giving away Titan Hunter, or has 7 characters or something, and or isn't GSC but has 7 characters that I can get to, something like that. Like, it's already hard. Like, we rely on there's about 3 or 4 missions where we can, World Eaters certainly can take the mission secondary, sometimes like we're genuinely reduced to grind them down, probably being the only thing we can take as our third, and even then that's not great. So yeah, that for me is what's going to be the defining factor, is how well other armies can score. And if we get more Oath of Moment type stuff where it's you've got a pretty solid 12 to 15 points every game, and then if you're already equipped to handle these more advanced secondaries, that will be the limiting factor. But again, that's less related to the fluff, I guess. If the secondaries remain fluffy, that's good, because everyone will get them eventually. So it's a competitive drawback for those of us insisting on playing the our 8th edition armies, but eventually we're going to be on the same level or close to it. So yeah, I think I think it's okay. And the other thing that kind of leads on, do you think those of us who do get a very late book in the edition, like one of the, the last 5, say, do you think we'll have a very short 9th edition experience, or do you think, like, we all know what what everyone would like, but that's not the way of the world. So let's say in a year's time we finally get our last Codex drop. How long do you think we're going to have until 10th ed?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Whenever I watch a bunch of YouTube channels who play testers and etc. And one of the things that they all say quite a lot is that the rules writing teams at Games Workshop and Games Workshop generally are constantly planning for the future, and they'll already be discussing 10th edition the point 9th edition drops and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, maybe it's not got long. I really don't know. And it's a very, very good question. And it's, because 9th edition has the roots to be really good.
Yeah.
So I think that there were a few, like the rule book I think was really good. There were a few things, fight first and fight last, probably being the best example, that confused people for a long time and were a bit intimidating for people. But that's been clarified now, and it's actually quite straightforward. And I think that, generally speaking, the rule book is really good. So they kind of took that from 8th edition, make the core rule book pretty straightforward. Cool. Have it fit on 10 pages or whatever. Then adds as much, and then add varying complexity to different codexes, make Space Marine super simple, add so for new players and everyone, that kind of makes everyone happy pretty much. The strong narrative players I know have been a bit upset. But quite frankly, a lot of the time they're often upset with how much narrative is in the game. Yeah. So, like, I don't know objectively. I know in the past Games Workshop have sometimes done more of a sandbox version. I absolutely would not object to it being the case that Games Workshop, makes another book that, like, this is sandbox rules for narrative play. Yeah. That's fine. Perfectly happy for that. And Games Workshop should cater to the narrative community. Yeah, absolutely. But I would definitely, to Games Workshop's defense, they have tried with Crusade. Even if you don't like Crusade, you can absolutely say they did their rule. They put a lot of effort and time into Crusade. Those rules were clearly looked at for a long time. So they did their best. And I guess, on that, one thing that I guess we haven't spoken about, but is revolutionary for 9th edition and the game generally, will be the app in theory one day, because the app changes so much about the game.
There's an app?
If the app works like we know it should work. Yeah. If you and I were going to have a game and you'd ping me your list, I'd click on your list. I'd be like, oh, what's this unit? Boom, I click it. What strats does it have? Oh, they're below. Like, can you imagine how better that would be for new players in the game for Warhammer 40,000? It would be unbelievable how great that would be. And so, in theory, the app would change everything. That's one thing. Sorry, I've gone off your question.
Oh, no,
how long will the new codexes have? I think you've got a little bit of time. I think one thing that people might not be thinking about right now, but I certainly am, is that 2022 is the year of Chaos Space Marines. We all hope and believe. It is also at the same time the year of Space Marines. If you count through in your head what comes after the Chaos Space Marines get their book, one assumes it will be the 9th edition Space Marine supplements. Now, the core Space Marine book is not, in hindsight, I think a lot of people agree, it was kind of a nerf from the 8th ed book 2. So, because of things like Chapter Master and stuff was so obscene. Yeah, I don't think they're going to be horrific, but you've got a bit of time there, I guess.
Yeah.
And we all read Psychic Awakening. We all saw the Games Workshop have been teasing squats for a while now. So
yeah.
in theory there'll be hopefully there'll be a new faction there.
Well, there's a couple. There could be like the Lost and the Damned, like Traitor Guard might be getting a book. I mean, there's leaks and stuff, but there's also actual models that can be brought over from Blackstone and stuff. So
well, squats are a fascinating one for me because like I see people online say all the time they think, oh, I think it's going to be leaked and blah blah blah, and it's like no, if you so it's in the Engine War book, like that is Games Workshop don't tell you years in advance what's coming, but that's as much if they do that. I believe that's what they do when things are coming. And if you have a look in that book, and in fact, I think you should be able to see it on the app if you've got the app subscription. You can see that there is a bit where they clearly say that they have rediscovered squats. So yeah, like I hope things like that will come. I hope Chaos Space Marine being last means something, so that'll be big. And I think that then 9th edition has to last at least for a bit more because often I think that the editions are going to be split into two. So we have a narrative at the start. The 9th edition is the Silent King, of course, and his return. And I believe there'll be a second part. And so that will be the return of, Fulgrim or Angron or Perturabo, whoever. Well, one assumes it'll be one of those two at least. So, I'm hopeful that we'll get a massive narrative campaign there. They're clearly they're revisiting Vigilus. I hope something more interesting happens this time. But so I'm very excited, to be honest.
No, I can't, I don't have a strong opinion on how long it will last for those of us who get our books late on, assuming CSM are one of the last ones. I would like to see, let's say the last book drops, December of 22. Like, we get lucky and all the books are released by the end of the year, okay? I would like to see at least 6 months, if not a full year, of us getting able to play it within 9th edition proper, but also when 10th edition rolls around, since the 8th edition reset, because 8th edition was a hard reset of the game, 9th has been a layer on top of 8th edition, right? I just want 10th to be another layer on top. Whatever, after all the feedback and tournament results and Crusade results and everything, all the data that GW can get hold of, and they look at some of the core rules, whether it's terrain rules or particular interactions, they just modify 9th slightly so our 9th edition books roll into 10th and are absolutely fine, and we don't get a Space Marines 2.5 or whatever. Basically the second Space Marine book in 8th, which revolutionized the game and just changed everything. Just give them a little bit more. Give them a little bit more to make them slightly better, because that's how you're going to sell the models. But let all the other 9th edition books still play the same game. Is kind of what I want.
I totally agree. I think things for 9th. I really enjoyed the conversations around narrative play, and like I say, I find it quite interesting because amongst the when I say narrative, like, we all play narrative play. In fact, it's probably what most of us play most of the time. But at the same time, there are some people that only play it and are very passionate about it and purely do long campaigns, etc. And what's interesting about talking to those people is, like, it varies very much person to person. And so I think the reason you see such a difference between, like, because in the 8th edition Codex there was like a sandbox narrative thing in the core book. But now we've got Crusade, and it's very, very different. And some people are very happy with that. Some people will love that. But I think Games Workshop struggled to get, I would assume, concrete feedback as to what is best for narrative play. Obviously, there are a lot of people with very strong opinions, and probably their group probably feels all the same way. But whereas competitive Warhammer 40k, the top players in the world, what they all believe, most of us pretty much do believe. Outside of some fringes. With narrative play, it varies so much as to what they should do. And narrative play also has this thing of how do you make it so that you get fascinating things that you get obsessed over and you love, like things like D&D, but at the same time they tried to do that with Crusade, and then people went, oh, there's way too much bookkeeping.
Yeah.
And so it was kind of this weird thing. And so again, that could be something that's fixed with the app. I don't know, but I'm really interested to see what they do with narrative play in 10th edition. If they do that, whether they consider Crusade a success and build upon it, or whether they go back and do different types of narrative play, I don't know. So I'm really interested there. I think the other thing I would like to see it in 10th edition, and I have to word this specifically because I want to see some complexity, some simplicity putting back into the game. And when I say that, because I've talked today about how I want things like Harlequins and GSC to get more complicated, and I do. But the thing is, complexity isn't. It's like chess is a very complex game.
Yeah.
There's so many things you can do with chess. At the same time, the rules of chess are simple.
Yeah.
That's how I would like things like GSC and Harlequins to get their rules. There are many things you can do with the faction. There are many decisions that you can make, but it's not full with unnecessary complexities. So, for example, you don't need exorbitant amounts of faction rules.
Right.
You don't need 2 pages of relics, most of which you will never use. You know, you don't need all of these strats that just confuse people. And like I'm talking more about new players here, admittedly, that are most of them confuse people, and most of them you will never use.
Yeah.
So what I would actually like is the books to be smaller, more impactful.
Yes.
And so, and I think that would go a long way, because I think that's probably the best way I would say it is. I want these books to not intimidate new players into the game, whilst at the same time providing great flavor for everybody. And I think that is possible. It's not something that you'll ever satisfy everybody, and absolutely I 100% give a lot of credence to GW that actually I think they balance a lot of things quite well, trying to satisfy everybody, and some people can never see that because they're not in the satisfied camp. But at the same time, I think they do a pretty good job most of the time. However, that's one area I think they can do better at. I think they can get the game less intimidating for new players, but actually also more entertaining for long-term veterans of the game, as it were. I think
there's definitely a way, and if you're a gaming company with a professional rules writing team and stuff like that, complexity doesn't need to be complicated, and you can have a good gradient of simple to complex that is equally fun along that scale, and works. Like if you want to play 3 big knights against a GSC army that half of it's invisible, half of it's in deep strike, and it can move on the first turn, even with my 3 big stompy knights, okay, you pull your tricks, mate. I'm still going to walk forward and shoot my big gun here and my big gun here, and then I'm going to stomp over those blips. It's 2 very different play styles, but they can meet in the middle. And I don't want to call knight players simple. I don't mean to say. I'm just saying.
No, I get what you mean.
Very.
Space Marines as well. I think are a good example. Yeah. They'll deliberately write the Space Marine rules to be a little bit more simple, but there's still power there. Yes, and so I guess really the way it would play out is that if there's 2 inexperienced players, one playing, let's say Harlequins, one playing Space Marines, the Space Marine player would probably win most of the time there. However, the higher up the ladder you get, in theory, Harlequins players should get more of the advantage. Yes. I guess. But I get what you mean. Yeah.
I think that's a good note to wrap it up, because we're well over an hour now, mate. I know it's getting a bit late for you, so I also want to.
So I like to talk about Warhammer 40K.
Oh no, me too, absolutely. Right. I could go, I could go on for hours, but I think that's a good point to end it, because I think overall, our opinions are very similar on the quality of codexes, our expectations, what we'd like to see from GW, and in a way, what we'd like to see from the community to just be. We don't have to shill, but we can criticize and have high expectations. But GW have done a very good job ultimately.
Yeah, I think this is a good conversation that we've had here in terms of. I think you and I'd like to think are quite balanced in our opinions, that we have absolutely criticised some of the things Games Workshop have done and things we'd like to see improved. But at the same time, when Games Workshop does a great job, I do think it's important to say they've done a really great job. Yeah. And there have been lots of things about 9th and things they've taken from 8th that are awesome and brilliant, and they kind of nailed it in a lot of ways. Yeah. So I think I totally agree. Like shill gets thrown about quite a lot, but I think it's important to call out when they do something good. Yeah. I genuinely do.
I mean, we both we use our leisure time to make content about 40k. We obviously love this game, It upsets us. It makes us happy. You know, it gives us every range of emotion on the scale there. But yeah, okay. Well, thank you very much for coming on and talking to me, mate.
No, thank you so much for having me. Yeah,
an absolute
so fun.
pleasure.
Yeah.
I'd love to do more of these things. Obviously, this is our second chat. I'd like, you know, every now and again we touch base and just talk because, you know, I'm the same way. I love talking 40k.
Yeah, and good luck at LVO, man.
Thank you very much.
Do you know how many World Eats players are going out?
I think I know 3. I'm going to know more people from the community, but not everyone is going to be running World Eaters. Like a couple of one's running Necrons and someone's running Black Legion and stuff like that. But I believe there's at least 3 of us kind of from the Red Path sort of community, and I'm sure there'll be a couple others.
Good luck, everyone.
Yeah. We're gonna have fun.
You'd be legends if you win Chaos Basements. You'll go down in history.
It's I don't know. There's been some conversation. I can see Black Legion doing pretty well. I can see.
Yeah.
And depending on there's a couple of players
that might
run Emperor's Children. But that's a conversation for another day. We could just record another hour now.
Yeah,
anyone watching, I'll have links below to the Sandman channel and Instagram and stuff like that. Please go give us a subscribe and all that stuff. Great content. And you know, I'll also have a link up in the corner of our previous video where we had a chat on his channel. Once again, mate, thank you very much, and thanks to everyone for
thanks
watching.
For having me.
Until next time, everyone, stay healthy, stay safe, and kill main bird.